Right now, we are working with our candle company sales spreadsheet. It has less than 100 rows, but imagine this Excel spreadsheet contained thousands of rows of information. With information about all the salespeople, how much each sold, the date they sold it, account numbers, and more. It is almost too much to read and comprehend. If I wanted to know who sold the most in February, how much March sales there were, or which account brought the most merchandise, a pivot table will help me answer these questions quickly. Sure, I might be able to find the answers by creating a chart or sorting, but pivot table reports gives you power because you can quickly find the answers to many different questions. Pivot table reports, or pivot tables as they are usually called, can help you answer questions about your spreadsheet by analyzing the numerical information in various ways. To create a pivot table, place your cursor anywhere in the spreadsheet data or select the data you want to use in the report. Now select Insert tab and in the Tables group, click Pivot Table and click Pivot Table again. Excel selects cells in the actual spreadsheet and the Create Pivot Table dialog box appears. Select Table or Range is automatically selected and the Table or Range field shows the range of the selected data. New Worksheet is also selected by default as the place where the reports will be placed. If you do not want the pivot table to appear in a new worksheet, just click the existing worksheet and select the name of the sheet. We'll just leave this as a new worksheet. Click OK, and the pivot table appears in a new sheet. Let's go ahead and name the sheet as Pivot Table. If this is your first look at a pivot table, you're probably wondering why they call it a pivot table. Basically, pivot tables allow us to pivot or move data so you can produce answers to your questions. You can very easily see what effect pivoting the data has on a spreadsheet's information. If we look at the actual spreadsheet, we can see that our column headings are salesperson, region, account, order amount, and month. When you create a table, each column label in your data becomes a field that can be used in the report. Let's take a look at the pivot table. On one side is the layout area for the report, and on the other side is the pivot table field list. This list shows the column titles from the source data. Now, before you create a pivot table report, decide what information you want to find. For example, in this spreadsheet, let's find out how much each salesperson sold. To answer these questions, we are going to need information about the salespeople and the order amount. To create this report, we need to select the checkbox next to the salesperson's field, and then select the checkbox next to the order amount field. And just like that, we can see how much each person sold and how much was sold total. I didn't select the other fields because I didn't need them to answer this question and build a report. Now let's look a little closer at the pivot table. You'll notice each of the selected fields appear in the default area, below, and in the layout area. All my salespeople data appears on the left side as rows, and the order amount data appears on the right. This is a default setting in Excel. Data with numbers always appear on right. The heading says the sum of order amount because Excel uses the sum function to add a field with numbers. Awesome! If you decide you don't want a field in the report, just clear the checkbox next to the field name by clicking it, and it will disappear. Now you can use pivot table to answer just one question, but I want you to see how quickly it can be used to answer multiple questions. What if we wanted to know how much was sold in each region? To answer this, add the region field as a report filter. Just click the region field in the list. By default, it will appear in the row labels group. Left click and drag it to the report filter section. Release the mouse button. Now region appears at the top of the report as a filter. To show just the data for a particular region, click the drop-down arrow and select the region. To see multiple regions, click the multiple regions box, select the regions you want to display, and click OK. Now we didn't talk about what pivoting means and how you can pivot data in reports. In this example, I might want to move the region filter to column labels so the information is presented in a different way. I can still filter and all my data is here. It's just organized in a different way. I can do this by left clicking and dragging the region field in column labels or even to values. It just changes the look of the report. Another way to pivot this report is by right-clicking one of the rows, select Move, and then click Move Salesperson to Columns. This will move the entire salesperson's field from the row label area to the column label area of the report. Again, this is just another way you can work with your data. To return the report back to the original view, right-click on one of the salesperson's headings and then select Move Salesperson to Rows. That will move the field back to the row area of the report. This is really just a basic overview of the pivot tables. There's so much you can do, but the best way for you to learn some of these concepts is to practice the basics that we just discussed. You may also want to explore the Options tab. From here, you can change the name of the pivot table. You can change the value of the field settings. Right now, we are calculating the sum of each salesperson's order amount, but we could just change that to the count of number of sales. Like this. We can also sort the data or even clear the entire pivot table and start from scratch. You can click Move Pivot Table to the new worksheet from the existing worksheet. I do want to spend a few minutes telling you about pivot charts. You can't really cover pivot tables without talking about pivot charts. Microsoft actually refers to this as pivot tables and pivot chart report because they do go hand in hand. After you create a pivot table, you can create a pivot chart with very little extra effort. This allows you to display the information in your pivot report in a graphical way. To create a pivot chart, select the Pivot Chart command from the Options tab. The Insert Chart dialog box appears. Select the chart you like and click OK. The chart will now appear on the same sheet as the pivot table. You will notice the information in the chart is the same information in the pivot table. Although our visual spreadsheet has information about the accounts and month of sale, this information is not included in the pivot chart because it's not part of the pivot table. You have a filter pane that will allow you to filter data for the chart, and I encourage you to explore this on your own. For right now, we'll just close this and we can always left click the chart and drag it a bit over if it is in the way of our data. When you first use a pivot table, the whole thing will seem overwhelming. Once you start working with pivot tables, you will realize that they are not really difficult. The key thing to remember with pivot tables is that you're not changing your original spreadsheet data. So it's okay to try different things and see what works. This video just covered the very basics of pivot tables. We worked with a simple spreadsheet and simple data. But I hope you can see how robust and useful this feature is, especially if you're working with a large spreadsheet of hundreds or even thousands of rows. Once you feel comfortable with this, you can explore and learn more about how to use pivot tables and pivot charts with your data.